She cooked, cleaned, and loved him in silence, while he barely looked up from his phone. Years of marriage, and she was still invisible. Until one night, someone finally saw her. An old friend who once loved her quietly, now standing where her husband should have been. One night, one confession, one choice that changed everything. She gave her heart away, and her husband never even noticed. People often think a peaceful life is a happy one. That routine, safety, simplicity, that's what we all long for. And for a while, Sasa believed that too. She and Harris had known each other since college. He was ambitious, charming in a quiet way, always focused on the next step. She admired that. When he proposed, there wasn't a single reason to say no. They were a good match, weren't they? They got married, moved to Tokyo, and began what everyone assumed was a perfectly normal life. But normal doesn't always mean happy and perfect. That's just a story people tell from the outside. Sasa was gentle, the kind of woman who notices everything. She cleaned the house, prepared the meals, smiled even when she was exhausted. She never complained. But that didn't mean she wasn't hurting. Because her husband is always indifferent to her, to everything, she waited. And when she did speak, just a small sigh, a tired sentence, he'd nod, half listening, never really seeing her. She had forgotten what it felt like to be looked at, to be truly seen. Until one day, someone did. Nicholas arrived in Tokyo on a warm afternoon that smelled faintly of summer rain. He was an old friend, someone they both knew from university. He and Harris had been close once, and Nicholas had known Sasa too, before Harris ever made a move, before he ever found the words to say, "I love you." But Nicholas never had. Back then, he had loved her quietly, from the corner of a classroom, from the back row of a friend group dinner. But he never told her. Harris did it first. And Nicholas, being who he was, shy, unsure, just stepped back. He disappeared after graduation, focused on his career overseas. Time passed. Life happened. He never expected to see her again. But when he stepped into their Tokyo apartment and saw her standing there, Sasa, still beautiful, still radiant in that soft way, something inside him paused. She smiled when she saw him. Her voice hadn't changed. It was like time folded in on itself. For a second, they were back in college again, young and bright and full of unsaid things. They hugged, politely at first, and Nicholas complimented her with a soft, stunned laugh. Sasa laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her eyes softened. Harris was thrilled too. They shared drinks, talked about the past, teased each other about old mistakes and university chaos. Nicholas looked around their apartment, neat, calm, quiet. There was something heavy in the air, something unspoken. After the conversation, Harris said, "You should stay the night. There's a guest room. You've had a long flight." Nicholas hesitated, but Sasa nodded. "It's no trouble. It'll be nice." Like old times, so he agreed. And in that small, carefully organized home, something fragile and silent began to stir. Sasa didn't expect anything to change. She was just being polite, hospitable, kind. That's who she was. She poured tea for Nicholas, showed him where to find the towels. They stayed up a little while longer, chatting softly in the living room, their voices weaving around the quiet tick of the clock.
水曜日ってことは3泊4日間。着替えちゃんと持ってき カゴに出すやつね。東京で会合か。
When Harris excused himself early, another message, another project, another deadline, Sasa simply smiled and said goodnight. But Nicholas noticed the way her smile didn't reach her eyes. He always had. He watched her gather the empty cups, move gracefully from one task to the next, just like she always used to. But now, there was a stillness in her, a kind of exhaustion, a quiet ache in every step. And as she moved past him, he couldn't help but ask, gently, "Are you okay, Sasa?" She froze for just a second, then smiled again. Of course. But he knew the truth, because once, long ago, he had loved her too deeply not to recognize sadness when it lived in her eyes. And for the first time in many, many years, someone finally asked her if she was okay, and truly meant it. The rain came softly that night, tapping against the windows like a distant memory. Harris was gone, called back to the office for an emergency meeting. He kissed Sasa on the forehead, almost like a habit, said he'd be back in the morning, and left. He didn't see the way her eyes followed him to the door. He didn't notice how long she stood there after the lock clicked shut. Nicholas did. He had been in the guest room, unpacking, but when he came out and saw her still by the door, arms crossed like she was trying to hold herself together, something inside him stirred again. And maybe it was the late hour, or the loneliness sitting between them. But Sasa didn't return to her room. Instead, she walked back to the living room, picked up the half-full wine bottle from dinner, and lifted it in the air.
Care to join me for round 2?
Nicholas chuckled. Only if you promise not to outdrink me like you did in college. So they poured their glasses, settled into the soft couch, and let the hours unfold. What started as casual reminiscing quickly shifted. The longer they talked, the more their guards dropped. Nicholas asked about Tokyo, about how long she and Harris had lived there. Sasa answered honestly, too long to feel new, not long enough to call it home. He asked about her daily life. She laughed a little, sipping her wine.
Nothing special. I clean, cook, make sure Harris has what he needs. I volunteer sometimes at a local library. That's about it.
He frowned. And what do you need? She blinked, caught off guard. It was such a simple question, one Harris never asked.
I don't know. I stopped thinking about that a while ago.
Nicholas didn't say anything right away, just looked at her. Not the way Harris did absently, without focus. No, Nicholas looked at her like he was seeing all the pieces no one else bothered to notice. The room went still. The only sound was the soft clink of glass when she poured them another drink. Time began slipping. They talked about who they used to be, about the dreams they'd had, the versions of themselves that never got to grow. Nicholas told her about his life abroad, endless work, brief relationships, a quiet ache that always followed him home. He laughed when he said it, but the kind of laugh that hides something behind it. And she understood, because she laughed the same way. At some point, the wine ran out, the air grew heavier. They weren't sitting far apart anymore. She had turned toward him, her knees tucked under her hair slightly messy from the couch pillow. Her face was flushed, not just from the alcohol, but from the weight of it all. The honesty, the closeness.
You can tell me anything.
He took a breath, then let the years fall out of him. I loved you, he said, back then, before Harris. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I was too scared. I thought you deserved someone braver. And when he made the first move, I just faded out. She didn't react right away, But he saw the way her eyes softened. She wasn't surprised. Not really.
I always wondered. You were always there, but never close enough.
She admitted. Nicholas looked up at her now. I regret it. Every day. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of things left unsaid for too long. I'm not asking for anything, he added quickly. I just needed you to know. Sasa didn't pull away, didn't change the subject. Instead, she reached out softly, gently, and touched his hand. Her fingers were warm, trembling just slightly.
I'm tired, Nicholas. So tired of being invisible.
She whispered. And in that moment, something broke open between them. Not passion, not recklessness, but understanding. A shared loneliness that had finally found its mirror. They sat there for a long time, not saying much, just breathing in the weight of what had been lost, and what might still be found. And as the night deepened around them, and their empty glasses sat forgotten on the table, neither of them realized how close their hearts had already moved. The clock had already slipped past midnight, but they didn't notice. Or maybe they did and didn't care. Sasa leaned back against the couch, her eyes heavy, her voice softer now, like each word carried weight she'd held inside for years. Nicholas watched her closely, not in a way that invaded, but in a way that said, I'm here. I'm listening. I always have been. The air between them felt different now, not just from the wine, but from the truths that had quietly unfolded like old letters finally opened. Sasa's gaze drifted toward him.
You know, sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if someone had just stopped me, asked me what I wanted, instead of assuming I was fine.
Nicholas didn't answer right away. He couldn't. His heart was pounding, like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, wondering whether to jump or turn back. But then he leaned closer, just a little, his voice almost a whisper. I wanted to be that person, he said, but I was too late. Sasa didn't look away, and then she smiled. Not the polite kind, not the exhausted, practiced kind she gave Harris when he wasn't really looking. This one was different. It was quiet, a little sad, a little brave. A smile that said, I see you. I remember you. And I still wonder, what if? They both realized it at the same time. They were sitting far too close. But neither of them moved. Outside, the Tokyo streets were silent. The rain had stopped, but its scent still lingered through the open window, mixing with the faint scent of wine and something far more dangerous, possibility. Nicholas lowered his gaze. I'm sorry, he said, the words catching in his throat, for not telling you, for letting you go without even trying. Sasa shook her head gently.
It's not your fault, but maybe if I had... Nicholas, you don't have to apologize for the past. You didn't know. I didn't know either.
She said, her voice low. She paused. Her eyes dropped to the floor.
But tonight, I feel like I'm remembering who I was before I became someone's wife.
There was a stillness in the room. And then, so quietly, it almost didn't seem real, she reached for his hand. This time, not just as a friend. Something flickered in Nicholas's chest hope. Fear, longing, everything he'd buried for years, suddenly right there, on the surface, raw and trembling. He looked at her, really looked, and saw a woman unraveling quietly after holding everything in for too long. And at that moment, he realized he wasn't just in love with the idea of her. He was in love with her sadness, her strength, her silence. With the parts of her even Harris had stopped noticing. She stood up slowly, steadying herself.
I should eat something, clear my head, maybe take a shower.
Time passed slowly after that. The distant hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the quiet apartment. Nicholas sat still, staring at the empty wine glasses, the dim light casting long shadows across the floor. He was thinking of everything what this night meant, what it could ruin, what it had already changed. Into the room prepared for guests, into a moment he dreamed of for years, but never imagined would actually come. Not like this, not wrapped in such quiet sadness, not glowing with such vulnerable truth. She sat on the bed, and he knelt in front of her. His voice trembled. "I still love you, Sasa. I never stopped." She didn't respond with words. She nodded gently in agreement. And that was all the answer he needed. What happened that night wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic or dramatic. It was soft, trembling, full of everything unsaid. They didn't talk about right or wrong. They didn't talk about tomorrow. They only talked about now. About how long it had been since someone touched her without expectation. About how long it had been since he felt something real. Nicholas returned to the guest room, heart still beating too fast. He lay awake, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. And even in the dark, he was smiling. Not because he had won. Not because he had taken something that wasn't his. But because, in just one night, he was finally accepted by the woman he loved. The city had already come alive outside, trains rumbling, horns humming. The smell of breakfast drifted faintly from the kitchen. Sasa was already up. And Harris? He returned around 8:15 a.m. He looked tired, but calm. Sasa greeted him with a gentle nod. He glanced at the table, then to Nicholas, who had just stepped out of the hallway. Harris laughed lightly. Nicholas offered a smile. And just like that, normal resumed. When breakfast ended, Harris grabbed his jacket and left for work again. Just like that. As the door closed, silence fell. Nicholas stood in the middle of the kitchen, unsure what to say, unsure what to feel. Then Sasa turned to him. Her eyes were calm, not glowing with new love, not bursting with emotion, but clear. He wanted to ask her what it meant. What would happen next? If last night was the start of something, or the closing of a chapter. But she didn't give him a chance to ask. Instead, she looked into his eyes and said,
What happened last night? I needed it. I don't regret it. But I need to find myself again. Not for you. Not even for Harris. For me.
Nicholas nodded. Slowly. He understood. Maybe more than she realized. And just like that, the moment passed. Not with drama. Not with tears. But with grace.
ただいま。
おかえりなさい、あなた。
あれ？
おかえりなさい。
拓也君は？
あ、今日会合があるってまだ書いてないわ。
そっか。俺さ、また今夜も夜勤になっちゃってさ。
あ、そうなの。
ちょっと着替えてくるわ。
They didn't make promises. Didn't say I'll wait for you. Or don't forget me. Because they knew this wasn't a story that needed a fairy tale ending. It had already served its purpose. And Sasa? She would wake up each morning now, not with fireworks, not with chaos, but with a quiet strength returning to her bones. Because now, someone had seen her. Not the wife. Not the caretaker, but her. And that changed everything.
帰りの新幹線のチケットは買えた？はい、もう携帯で取りました。そっか。確か11時23分の新幹線で。じゃあそろそろ会社行ってくるから。またいつでも来てよ。じゃあ行ってくんな。
いってらっしゃい、あなた。
いってらっしゃい。
If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect. how many people around you feel invisible, unheard, unnoticed? Sometimes asking, "Are you okay?" and truly meaning it is more powerful than love itself.